In this video, I am so excited to be sharing my newest free training with you. I won't talk too much about what it is in the start of the training, I cover that, but I just wanted to film another quick intro for you watching on YouTube to let you know that this is a long, in-depth training. I tried to make it as sort of fast-paced and really actionable and really enjoyable to watch as possible, but to fit all of my best stuff in, it had to be a little lengthy because there's a lot of good stuff there. And this is the exact same stuff that I teach my students in lessons. It's a test drive of the next generation clarinet method, so it's the best stuff pulled out of the program, and you're getting access to it completely for free. The problem, though, is oftentimes when we're getting something for free, but it's going to take a lot of time to watch, there's not a lot of financial motivation to actually watch it, absorb it, and implement it. And there's a bit of a high time barrier because you have to take the time to actually watch it. And when we have that high time barrier and low financial motivation, it can be really tempting to say, oh, this would be a really cool thing to do. I think I could get some benefit from this, but I don't really have time now. Maybe I'll come back to it later. And then you never come back to it. I want you to absorb all of this information and implement it all and get some awesome results for yourself in your clarinet playing. That's why I made it free, so that as many people as possible are able to access it. And that's why I'm here right now, pushing you and challenging you to actually absorb it and implement it. Now, there's a couple of ways to make that easier for you. First, if you go to quickstartclarinet.com/test drive, which I'll link in the description, you can put your email address in there. I'll send you the link to the training along with some motivation and inspiration to keep you going at it. The other thing is the training itself is split up into 3 parts, just like the full Next Generation Clarinet Method program is split up into 3 parts. So it's a little bit more consumable and digestible looking at just a part at a time. In the training, I talk about sort of doing one day for each part at a time, so it's a little bit easier. But a little additional bonus for those of you watching here on YouTube, you've maybe seen some of my live Monday music motivations, and in there I'm always talking about scheduling your practicing and really committing the time to it, and I recommend you do the same thing with this. And I'll say the stuff in here is even so good that I think you could even do this instead of practice time on some days. I think you would get a lot of value out of it, and it would be just as beneficial for you as actually practicing to watch this. Plus, each part has some implementation that involves practicing. So if you have practice time already scheduled in your calendar, maybe just plug in 30 or 40 minutes to watch one of the parts of this training so that you can absorb the information and get the best results out of it, because literally my very best stuff is in here. If you take the time to absorb it and implement it, you will get results. So I'm challenging you, actually do that, do whatever you need to make it happen, and I hope that you enjoy the Next Generation Clarinet Method test drive. Hello, and welcome to the Next Generation Clarinet Method test drive. This is going to be a behind-the-scenes look and actual experience of all of my very best stuff from the Next Generation Clarinet Method. So no matter what skill you're at, whether you're a beginner or a more advanced player or anywhere in between, by the end of this training, you should have some really tangible and actionable things to be working on to get less frustrations and more joy out of your clarinet. So let's jump into it. So like I mentioned, my mission is for you to get results from this training. So if you really watch the whole thing, absorb the information, take notes, you're really attentive to the information I'm sharing, you're going to get results from the next gen test drive that we're doing here. Like I said, it's all of my best stuff from the program. This is my sort of flagship program for learning the clarinet. It's, in my opinion, the best self-taught clarinet method out there, because it's not just the method book. We all have tons of method books, but it's also videos and timelines and things to really show you how to do it correctly and get the most out of it, as if the teacher has been baked into the book. I'm really going to try to have as little fluff as possible in this. Sometimes I talk a little bit too much, but we're going to get right into the points and right into the actionable stuff. But it's really important that you do the work and you get what you need out of this. Like you can see, this is not a very short training. I'm literally trying to pack in all of my best stuff in here for you. So you can watch it however you like. It would probably be best to work through it in sort of chunks. I have it split up into 3 big sections, and you could probably do each one of those sections in a day. So you watch the first section, you do the implementation work. We have some work in there for you to actually implement it and try it out on your own. So watch it, do that for that day, and then come back for the next part the next day, and then come back for the third part the third day. That's how I would recommend going through it. Of course, you can absolutely binge it all right now and get to implementing right away. You can also do 2 days per chunk. However, the information is going to work best for you to actually get it into your brain, absorb it, and put it into action in your clarinet playing. That's the most important part, is that you do the work and you take that action, because you can have all the information in the world, but unless you start putting it into practice, you're not going to see any results or any changes from it. And again, my mission is to get you results. I want to add one more thing. If you're watching this on the quickstartclarinet.com/test drive page, you can scroll down and you'll find a place where you can put in your email address. So if you just came across this and you don't have enough time to watch the whole thing right now, or you don't want to forget to come back to this, because I totally get it. It's easy to forget, easy to get distracted and move on to something else and not have time, or just entirely not remember to come back to it. So if you want to get some email reminders and get the link emailed to you as well, so you'll be able to come back to this training to reference it for notes or anything like that, put your email and name in down there, and I'll send you some reminders so that you can get through this training, so that you can do the work, and so that you can get results in your clarinet playing. So let's get started with part 1. Part 1 is all about learning. And again, this training is set up exactly the same way as the actual next generation clarinet method, which is also in sort of 3 conceptual chunks, with learning being the first part. Mastering is the second part, where we really get into the fundamentals and actually put them to work. And then the third part is applying it to actual music examples. And we're going to do all of those. So this is part 1, learning. I hope you're ready to learn some good stuff about the clarinet. So first of all, you can hear in this recording of me playing the Barrio sequenza that's playing in the background here, no matter how complicated the music gets, this is pretty complicated music, sounds pretty crazy, looks even crazier than it sounds. No matter how complex it gets, the components of playing the clarinet are the same. From Mary Had a Little Lamb, Hot Cross Buns, all the way through Barrio sequenza, Nielsen concerto, Grigliano concerto, whatever crazy stuff that you're playing, it's all the same components of clarinet playing. And those components are to sound good, so you have to have good quality to the sound and be playing the appropriate volume and intensity of the sound, so you have to sound good. We have to move the fingers to the right place at the right time. That's playing the notes. That's also a little bit of rhythm, but that's a component of music, which we'll talk about later. But you have to move your fingers to the right fingering to play the right note on the clarinet. And then the last thing is to articulate as indicated. Is it accented? Is it slurred? Is it staccato? What are those articulations, and how do you want those articulations to come across? What energy are those articulations providing to the music? And that's it. Even on this crazy complicated stuff, all I have to do is sound good, wiggle my fingers, and articulate. That's it. So, since that's all you have to do, then it becomes a little bit easier, and it hopefully gives you some clarity on what you need to be focusing on in your playing. So, starting off with sound, I have this how to play clarinet triangle, and again, this graphic comes right from the program. This is all the components of sound and the important components of sound. And hopefully you're starting to see my sort of philosophy and my teaching style is to take the big complicated stuff like the Brio Sequenza and just simplify it down into just simple categories, simple little things to be working on in really basic ways that are going to empower you to do the complicated stuff later. So this is all sound is: air, embouchure, and tongue. That's all you need to manage to have a great sound. And I think a lot of times we think more air is something that I say a lot, or a stronger embouchure. I haven't played for years. My embouchure is kind of weak, so I need to wait for it to strengthen up, those kinds of things. But it's not so much about the strength. It's much more about the coordination and finding a balance between those. You have to balance the amount of air support with the amount of embouchure, and you use the tongue to aim the air to help find that balance. And then, of course, you have to balance it with the reed and the mouthpiece and the instrument itself, too. Those are obviously important components to the clarinet playing. But I would argue that you can find a great sound on pretty much any reed mouthpiece instrument setup with the right combination of variables of the air, embouchure, and tongue. So again, it's that balancing act. You can have a really terrible reed that just does not want to vibrate, but if you get the embouchure in just the right place and the air support and the tongue position directing the air, then it will work. Of course, we want to play on equipment that makes it easier to do that rather than too hard, but I think it is possible. Now, like I mentioned, it's not about just more air or more embouchure strength. I really like to think about maximizing the energy of these things. So it's a balance, and the balance that we're going for is what gives us the most energy. So we want to find a reed that has good springiness to it and can have a lot of vibrating energy. We want to find the right embouchure support that gets enough of the reed vibrating to maximize the energy of the vibrations going through the instrument. Of course, we need enough air to resonate through the instrument so that there's actually air in the instrument to be vibrating and resonating the instrument. And then, of course, the tongue also, we want to be focusing the air to maximize the energy. If you blow just with no tongue position, just a really neutral tongue, the air goes really fast and there's no efficiency or energy to it. Whereas when we get that quintessential high tongue position that we like on the clarinet, sort of like you're saying E or E, we get that shh. There's so much more support and so much more energy to the reed that's going to provide energy through the instrument and energy to the sound. And that's the key to a clear, full sound, is that there's energy and stability to the energy as well. Now, clarinet myth number 1, there's going to be a few myths about clarinet warm-ups practice throughout the presentation. These are the things that you've probably heard a lot from teachers or videos, or maybe even my videos occasionally. But they're just common sort of things that we focus on too much. So like I mentioned already, you've maybe not played for several years. You feel like your embouchure is weak and needs work, but it's probably a myth. You probably don't really need a stronger embouchure. You probably need a more coordinated embouchure. You probably need an embouchure that's working with the reed and working with the air better. So when we go to the implementation work towards the end of this section, this might be something that's worth exploring for you. Is it that your embouchure actually needs to be stronger? Or do you maybe need to push the jaw forward a little bit just to firm up the bottom lip, get a better connection between the teeth and the lip? Or maybe you just need more mouthpiece in your mouth so that you have more reed to actually be vibrating. Or maybe it's just a little bit more air, a little bit more focused tongue position. I think in general, the embouchure needs to have some strength to it, but again, the coordination is much, much more important than just sheer strength. So I have an embouchure exercise that we can do to help find that coordination to the embouchure. And again, this is literally a screenshot from the Next Generation Clarinet method. So you're getting all the best stuff, the full behind the scenes here. And if you implement it, you're going to get results. So this one finger embouchure exercise is really fun. You stick your finger in your mouth like it's the clarinet and try to find your normal clarinet playing angle, but around 45 degrees is generally what I recommend. Some people say 45 is too much, or a lot of people say between like 30 degrees and 45, and that's for this angle here, 30 to 45. You can play with that, but around 45 or so, 30 to 45 is good. And you're going to put your top teeth on your fingernail, just like you do on the mouthpiece, and then you're going to suck on your finger as if you're trying to use it as a straw, and you're trying to drink like a really thick milkshake or smoothie or something through your finger, and you get that kind of effect. A couple things to be thinking about as you're doing this is we want to be flattening and pointing the chin. We want to bringing the corners in, bringing the top lip down. Most people naturally do that when they suck on it like a straw. Some people will get this kind of embouchure going, or this kind of sucking going, where the chin really bunches up and everything gets sort of bunched up. It just depends how you normally use a straw. But we don't want to get too bunched up for the clarinet playing. We want to be thinking about pointing the chin down, bringing the corners in, opening up, and just like a straw, if you clamp down trying to suck on it, you're just going to close off the straw, pinch it off, break it, and you're not going to get your milkshake. So we want to keep the corners in, keep everything open, and suck that way. And you can check in the mirror if you're getting this pointed chin, nice round front to it, then you're in good shape. Now, we just do that on the clarinet. And you can even do this where you pretend that the clarinet's a straw, kind of. Put it in. Obviously, you won't have as much resistance sucking on it. If you want, you could take your barrel or mouthpiece off and plug it with your hand and then suck, and you'll actually get the resistance. That wouldn't be a terrible thing to explore and experiment with if you really want that same feeling. But as long as you're getting the similar sensation, flat chin, corners in, teeth on the mouthpiece, then suck in and then blow out just easily and naturally. And it may not sound perfect because you aren't doing a great job with your air yet. When we suck through the clarinet, it's hard to get a good, full, supported breath. But that will help you to sort of find where the embouchure is. A couple other tips for the embouchure is to remember that we want to be anchoring the clarinet up into the top teeth and the top lip. So we have the mouthpiece going into the teeth, but then we have the lip coming down to sort of help cushion that a little bit. So we have a good, solid anchor between the top teeth and top lip and corners a little bit. And your right thumb, you should be able to hold the clarinet pretty securely, so that there's not too much wiggling, even without your bottom lip on. And then, of course, when you bring the bottom lip to the reed, that provides a little bit more security, but we want to maximize the coordination and energy of the reed vibrations. So we want to make sure that we aren't resting the clarinet down into our bottom lip, because that's going to be pinching off those reed vibrations. And then when you do go to blow, and especially when you're actually taking a real breath, think about really sealing with the corners rather than closing down with the jaw to start playing. That's such a natural and intuitive motion for us because it's chewing, talking, all of these things is this up and down jaw motion. So that's super natural for us. The squeezing in the corners is a much less natural jaw motion and mouth motion for us. And it's not that we can't do it or that it's hard to do. It's just unfamiliar. And that's a little pro tip that I just bonus tip for you. Whenever you feel like anything's hard, try to reset your mental state and say, no, it's not hard, because depending on the perspective, it's not hard. That little ditty that I played in the beginning maybe sounds hard to you, but it wasn't very hard to me at all. Thinking of like your favorite professional, they probably wouldn't struggle with pretty much anything that you're working on. And even if they did, they'd be able to figure it out and play it very well. So it's not hard for them. So we can't call it hard objectively. What it is it's unfamiliar. So that's a good little mental tip for you, is anytime you're finding something to be hard or difficult, replace that with, no, it's just unfamiliar. I just haven't gotten familiar with it or figured it out yet, but it's not objectively hard. So that's embouchure. Now let's talk about fingers a little bit. This is the sort of next big component. We had sound quality was our first big aspect of playing the instrument and component of playing. Fingers are the second one, moving the fingers to the right place at the right time. When it comes to finger motion, there's a few variables or components that I think are really important. And again, you can see that taking these complicated things and just putting them into their nice little compartments, because our brain likes compartments, and that's my goal as a teacher, is to make it as easy to learn as possible. So the first thing for the fingers that's really important to be getting your fingers to the right place at the right time is that they're relaxed. The more tension you have, the harder you try to do a particular fingering or move between specific notes, the harder it's going to be. Another bonus mental tip for you. This comes from Alan Watts, is the one who named it this, I think in the 50s or so, but it comes from sort of like Eastern philosophical type things. But Alan Watts's term was the backwards law. The backwards law states that the harder we try to do something, the harder it is to do. And this absolutely applies to the fingers, where if we're, say, playing B flat to F, or any combination, or even better, let's do crossing the break. A to B, we're crossing the break. And you think, oh, crossing the break, I have to get off the A key, that's tricky. I have to coordinate all these other fingers and land at the same time. So I'm going to need to try really hard to get everything to go at the same time. And the harder you try, the more tension there is. And the more tension there is, the harder it's going to be for your fingers to actually coordinate and do what you want. So relaxation is the first most important part of fingers. Another little bonus tip for the relaxation aspect: hand position plays a huge role in how relaxed your fingers can be. A really common issue that we have with hand position is that gravity sort of takes control of the clarinet and starts pushing it down. So our wrist is kind of up, the clarinet's kind of down in relation, and you can see what happens to my pinky. It gets really straight, and it's really hard to get around to these keys. I can feel a ton of tension in this knuckle. When our fingers are really straight like this, or really bent like this, that creates tension and makes it harder to move and utilizes awkward muscle combinations, and you have muscles working against each other, and it's just a bad time. So hand position can be really helpful when it comes to relaxation. My favorite way to work on hand position is to just shake the hand out, let it dangle naturally, and then instead of going to the clarinet and then naturally doing your bad habits, keep the hand dangling naturally, bring the clarinet to it, and you'll find probably that you land in front of the holes pretty easily. And you might have to change where your thumb is. That might be a little different than normal. The thumb doesn't need to be perpendicular this way or at a certain amount. Mine kind of naturally lands there. It might be hard to see. That's a hard angle to get, but easy, natural, relaxed. And that hand position where the clarinet's going up, which we talked about is good for the embouchure, the wrist is staying down and relaxed. The fingers have a natural curve to them, not too straight, not too bent, and you can get around to everywhere that you need to be really easily. So relaxation is the first part of fingers. The next part is minimal motion. This is a very classic one you've probably heard before from a band teacher, or even maybe a community band conductor or a private teacher, to keep your fingers close to the keys. And this is all that is. And I think this is perfectly intuitive. The closer you are to the keys, the easier it's going to be to hit them and not miss. The further away, the more you have to go, the easier chance of missing. If all your fingers aren't the same distance away, then like this finger is going to get there a lot sooner. These fingers are going to be a little slower, and it's just going to be hard to coordinate. So minimal motion is really helpful. It also helps with relaxation because moving a little bit is a lot easier and less muscle work than moving a lot. Next up, we have independent finger motion. This kind of ties into minimal and relaxed, and all of these variables are related to each other and help each other. So it's good to think about relaxing sometimes fixes everything else. Thinking about minimal motion sometimes fixes everything else. So they're all interconnected, but independent motion means we don't want the fingers to be interconnected. So a classic example I sort of just demonstrated already, you're playing up your scale, you lift the pinky off, oh good, it's nice and close to the keys, minimal motion, you lift the ring finger off, but did you notice my pinky also moved? So the ring finger's in a good place, but now the pinky's further. I lift the middle finger's good, but the ring finger's further, the pinky finger's even further. I lift the index finger, and next thing you know, we're not close to the keys at all because we didn't have independent motion. When we lifted the next finger, the previous finger wanted to follow and not move independently. Another huge issue with independent motion is the left pinky. A lot of times when people have that bad hand position and the straight left pinky, you have to move the whole hand and the whole wrist to get around to these pinky keys. And notice when I move the pinky and the whole hand, this ring finger also moves. And if that ring finger comes uncovered, then you're going to have a leak, you're going to squeak, and you're going to have issues. So making sure that you can keep these fingers in position and move around to the pinky keys with just the pinky moving, or at least with as little other motion as possible, as much independence as possible, is a really important aspect of the fingers. And then finally, they need to be precise or precisely coordinated. So this just comes down to, like, if you're moving multiple fingers at once, they need to move at exactly the same time, because if one of them's a little bit slow or a little bit late, then you're going to have that extra junk in between notes, or maybe even a squeak if you do the wrong coordination of it. If, say, we're going from C to G, if I get the ring finger and the middle finger down before the first finger, then I'm leaking there and it could squeak. So we need that real good precision of everything landing together. And again, if you're moving minimally, if you're relaxed, that's going to be a lot easier. Now you might be wondering why I have a light switch on this slide. The light switch is a great analogy for how our fingers should be moving. There are some exceptions where you have to get to side keys, or like the pinky has to manage a few keys, or the throat tone keys. But for the most part, we want our fingers to be like a light switch, where there's just two positions and it goes between those positions very, very quickly. So hopefully you can see there's the first finger's on and it's off, and it's on and it's off. And those are the only two positions that it has. Maybe it has the side key, but with the exceptions of those, on, off, on, off. Just like a light switch. Same thing with every single finger. We just have those two positions, and the more we can, in a relaxed way, stick to those two positions for the fingers, the better off you're going to be when it comes to playing and playing speed and playing coordination and all of the important parts, that key component of getting your fingers to the right place at the right time. So moving on from fingers, now we have articulation. So this is a great illustration that I got from Cornell Volak, who has lots of really good embouchure and tongue and all kinds of fun resources. I made a couple edits, redrew in some things that is more how I feel. But something like this. There's no perfect position for the tongue or the embouchure or things like that. It's a little bit different for everybody, but this is sort of my illustration of how I think it feels to me, at least. So again, we have some key components of articulation. The first one is minimal motion. You have to know that the tongue has two functions. Articulation is one function of the tongue, but another function of the tongue is back in sound quality as a part of playing the clarinet, right? That sound quality part is the position of the tongue. So we have this high arch to it, like I talked about, that sort of E, to create this nice narrow passage to energize the air. We have the position here that's really determining the pressure of the air right at the point of the reed. And then we have the tip of the tongue that does the work to articulate. So if you're articulating and you're moving the entire tongue, then you're not just stopping the reed vibrations and getting an articulation, you're also changing the entire sound of the note that you're playing and the entire energy of the note that you're playing. So we want really just the tip of the tongue, as little of the tongue as possible moving, to just the tip of the reed to dampen the reed vibrations when we articulate. So the more that we're disrupting those other parts, the more of a problem we're going to have. And I said the tongue, but it's even more than just the tongue. We have to have the middle front of the tongue that's controlling this space. That's really important that that stays steady and consistent. The middle and back of the tongue that's controlling this space, that has to stay consistent. But also the throat, the soft palate, how open this space is back here also plays a really important role in the sound and the voicing. And then also the embouchure too. We have to keep the embouchure steady. This is a really common thing when it comes to articulation, where we hear the sound stop, so we stop producing the sound. We stop the air, we pinch off the embouchure, we don't care about the tongue position anymore. And then when we go to start again, it's like restarting all of those things, which is really, really difficult and challenging and takes a ton of work. So instead, we don't want to disrupt anything. The reed vibrations stop, the sound stops, but the air is still going, the embouchure is still steady, the throat is the same, the back of the tongue, the middle of the tongue, the middle front of the tongue, everything is exactly the same. The only thing that happens is the tip of the tongue touches the tip of the reed to stop the reed vibrations, and then you release right back to that good voicing, and everything comes out really well. Interrupt the tip of the reed, don't interrupt the sound. To demonstrate this, I'll tongue a few notes, and I'm going to intentionally leak so that you can hear what my air is doing, and hopefully you can see my embouchure and stuff as well. Unfortunately, you can't see my tongue. If there was a way to do that easily, that would be amazing, because it's really difficult to teach and learn articulation because you can't see what the tongue's doing. But hopefully you can hear the sound continuing in the air as I'm leaking the air. And you can hear, no matter how much space there is, whether it's staccato or legato, the air is continuing, the sound is still being supported. I'm just have my tongue on the reed for as long as I want, for however much space in between the note, and then off the reed back to my good playing position to have the sound actually happening. So that is articulation. Clarinet myth number 2, you're tonguing too hard. This is one that, again, is really common. You've probably heard this as well when you're having kind of like thuddy articulation or things like that, that you're tonguing too hard. But I think it's a myth. I don't really think it's possible to tongue too hard. There are definitely tongue motion problems that we can have, but I don't think just too hard is really the problem. I do think being lighter with your tongue and less hard is helpful, but not for the reasons that we think. When we say that you're tonguing too hard, you think that the problem is how hard you're hitting the reed. The problem actually is when you're tonguing too hard, you're probably moving your tongue too much. Because if you're trying to hit the reed really hard, you can't hit the reed hard with just the little minimal tip of the tongue that we're trying to use to articulate. So you're probably bunching up the whole tongue at the reed, and then when you come away, you're not in position for the sound to happen. So then there's a little thuddy start where there's not good sound, and then it comes into focus. In slow motion, this might sound like this. So you hear that like really muddy, yucky start to it. It's because I have too much of my tongue close at the tip of the reed. I am too slow getting back to my actual good playing position spot. So as I'm making that transition from bunched up at the tip back to where I need to be to play, we're hearing thud, grunt, not good sound. The other big thing that will happen if you're tonguing too hard or getting those thuds and grunts is just that you're stopping the air. So you get this sort of effect. So we kind of hear the tongue coming off the reed, and then the air goes and actually gets the sound started again. So it's not that it's too hard, it's that you're moving too much, you're not keeping the air fluid and steady. My favorite way to work on articulation is to play a long tone and then move your tongue independently of that long tone happening. Leaking is a great way to test that, so you do that exercise of so I have long tone air, long tone embouchure, long tone throat, soft palate, back of tongue, middle front of tongue, and then just the tiniest tip of the tongue does the work to stop the reed from vibrating. Now, we are at the end of the learning section. Like I said, those are the 3 components. That's all there is. Sound good, fingers to the right place at the right time, articulate. That's all you need to do for even the most complex music. So now you get some time to actually work on that. And again, I really encourage you to pause this. If you're going with the route of one section at a time, this is where we'll be stopping for today. And again, if you want a reminder to come back to this, if you're on the quickstartclarinet.com/test drive page, there's a place to put in your email, and I'll send you friendly email reminders to come back and keep working at this. But what we're gonna do for today's putting it into practice is to set a 10 to 15 minute timer. And all you're gonna do is pick one of those things that we talked about, embouchure or sound, finger motion, or articulation. And maybe you could do 2, maybe you can do all 3, but definitely do a 15 minutes if you're doing all 3 and spend 5 minutes on each component of clarinet playing. And then explore and experiment with it. I don't want you to be doing actual music. I want you to just be trying something new, exploring, finding. If you normally play with a certain embouchure, you're going to need to change it to get a different result. And that's not saying that your embouchure is bad or needs to change, but there's nothing wrong with trying something different, thinking about, oh, maybe I will try anchoring up a little bit more or a little stronger with the corners, or do the exercise where you shake out the hand and then bring the clarinet to it. Something like that. And then go to the extremes with it. If you're experimenting with the sound and trying more reed in your mouth, keep putting more reed in until you get a big squawk or something like that. Finding those extremes tells us where the limits are. The sweet spot, where we want to be, might be really close to one of those extremes. And if we never go all the way to the extreme, then we never find it. I find so many players and so many students play within like this much range, this much dynamic range, this much tempo range, this much embouchure support, air support. We're sort of going to the bare minimum of like, okay, if I do this, I get a sound to come out. But what if we went from all the way to not having any sound coming out, all the way to a squeak or some other extreme? When we find the extremes, we cover all of the options so then we can find the sweet spot. Another way to think about this is the more data you have on what not to do, the more likely you are to narrow in on what to do. And then my last idea for this is make sure that you don't get distracted. It's gonna feel weird. It's gonna be tempting to go play something else. It's going to be tempting to like experiment with your embouchure for like 30 seconds and then be like, okay, I did it. But really try to commit to that timer that you're setting, whether it's 10 or 15 or 5 minutes for each component. Really stay with it. Stay focused for that amount of time. It's not that long. You can keep that focus going. And it's when you start getting tired or running out of ideas, that's when you're going to start coming up with new ideas and things that are actually going to make a difference for you. So that's the putting it into practice here for part 1. Pause this now, whether you're binge watching it all or doing it day by day. Pause here, check the timestamp so that you can come back to it when you want to continue on with part 2. But go do this exercise, try something new, and I promise you'll find something. If you stick with the time and really get curious and really go to the extremes, you're going to find something that feels a little different or feels a little new. It makes it a little bit easier to play. And that's what we're here for. If we can find something that makes it 1% easier, 1% easier every day is like almost 4 times easier by the end of the year. So find those little improvements and those little new things, and pause here, and then we'll continue on to part 2. All right, we are back for either day 2 for you if you're doing the 3-day approach. And if you made it back for day 2 and took that day off, I'm so proud of you. Again, I know there's so much to do, so many things to get distracted with. It's easy to not come back, but if you're here, that means that you are committed to improving your clarinet playing, and hopefully you've enjoyed the stuff from day 1. If you're binging through it and you just finished doing your 10 to 15 minutes of experimenting and exploring and trying those new fundamentals and new ideas that you might have learned in part 1, that's awesome. If you just came from that side and didn't take your time to actually implement it and put it into practice, I seriously want you to pause and go do that. Again, you can put your email in and I'll email you reminders so you won't forget to come back to it if you get distracted and enjoy practicing, which by all means, go enjoy practicing if that's something you want to do right now. But do the work, because it's the work and the implementation that's going to make a difference. Again, you've probably heard some things about how your embouchure should be and how your air should be. I bet some of those things in part 1 you already knew, but do you already do them? It's the doing that makes the difference. So if you didn't, last chance to pause and actually put into practice part 1. Otherwise, we're going on to part 2. Happy day 2 for those of you who are here on another day. So part 2 is all about mastering. Part 1, we've learned those components and how those components should work. Part 2, we're mastering those things and getting more practice with them and being really in control of them to find good consistency with them. And that's what the real power of warm-ups are. Warm-up exercises, I think, sort of get a bad reputation of something that's sort of like boring, or you just kind of sort of do it. And I think that's because when we warm up doing exercises or things like that, the warm-up is kind of the boring part. It's not where you're like lifting the weights and like really getting the results in your exercise. It's just sort of warming up the muscles, getting things going. But you know it's important in exercise so that you don't hurt anything. I don't think you're gonna like pull a muscle playing clarinet probably if you don't warm up. But warm-ups are something completely different than that. What warm-ups actually are your opportunity to practice the fundamentals. If you're bored, if you find warm-ups boring, you're doing them wrong. Because they are boring. If you just look at a simple long tones or just, I gotta play my scales, okay, okay, I'm playing my scales, woohoo. That is super boring. But when you start to shift your perspective and think of warm-ups as fundamentals, that's when everything changes. This actually happened for me. I have a very concrete moment in my clarinet playing journey where warm-ups changed and my perspective on warm-ups changed. In high school, I was a pretty good player. I was one of the better players at my school, and we did warm-ups in band class. But I actually thought and actually said, like, brass players, they need to warm up because it's a lot more active with their lips buzzing and that kind of stuff. So, like, yeah, I get it. We have to, like, sort of sit through the warm-ups and let the brass players warm up so they don't hurt themselves. But woodwind players, we, like, wet our reed, slap it on, and we can go. And I think that is kind of true. But I thought the warm-ups were purely just for the brass players. Then, in my senior year of high school, I started studying with Dr. Jeremy Reynolds, who I would end up doing my undergraduate degree with at the University of Denver. And he started me on warm-up exercises. The good old Christmas tree long tones, which are to this day one of my favorite long tone exercises. And we spent a lot of time on long tones. We did half a page of the C major Albert scales, if you're familiar with the Albert scale book. and an articulation exercise. That's pretty much the majority of what I did for my whole senior year. I did those warm-up exercises like every year, my whole senior year every day, my whole senior year of high school, those same warm-up exercises. And I don't think I ever got bored of them. One long tone exercise, half a page of scale patterns, one articulation exercise, a whole school year. And I never got bored. And the reason why is because he shifted my perspective from these things being like something that you just sort of go through the motions on and like try to play along notes to something where you actually figure out how to play the clarinet on and target those components of clarinet playing that we talked about in part 1. It absolutely changed my life. My junior year of high school, I was like in the back of the 3rd clarinets in All-State. My senior year of high school, I was first chair, first clarinet in the All-State Honor Band. And I think a majority of it was because I had that perspective shift, and Dr. Reynolds showed me how to actually work on the fundamentals and make warm-ups interesting. So hopefully I'll share that with you as well, and you'll start mastering the clarinet through those good fundamentals. Speaking of fundamentals, long tones, technique, articulation, that's my idea of a good warm-up. I call it the 3-step warm-up. And you'll notice that it kind of correlates to those 3 components of clarinet playing, right? Long tones are all about finding our sound. Technique is wiggling the fingers to the right place at the right time. And usually technique is, you could also think of as scales. Most technique exercises are some kind of scale or scale pattern, but there can be some that aren't just scales. So that's why I call it technique rather than just scales. And then articulation. And that's working on your articulation and tonguing and shaping the notes the way that you want. So that's the 3-step warm-up. That's the shift to thinking about them as fundamentals rather than warm-ups is going to make the difference in your playing. And then also using all that stuff you learned in part 1, experimenting and exploring and finding those sweet spots on the warm-ups is going to be the key. So starting with long tones, this is a long tone exercise from the Next Generation Clarinet method. Super simple. This is one of the most important parts of warm-ups and fundamentals is that the music needs to be simple enough that you're not stressed about it. So hopefully you know enough about playing to play it, even at least that first line with no stress. You're not going to have to look up any fingerings. There's nothing crazy going on there. The rhythm isn't complicated at all. You don't have to worry about the music. None of your brain's bandwidth is going to the music. 100% of your brain bandwidth is going towards the purpose of the warm-up, which in this case, since it's a long tone, its sound quality is the most important. So there's no rhythm pressure. And this is also a common misconception with long tones. I should have put this in as a myth, but a common misconception of long tones is that the purpose of them is to build endurance. And you can do long tones like that, but I don't think that's the best thing to do. Now, the way that I treat long tones is they're all about sound quality. You can hold each note as long as you want. You can breathe whenever you need to. The idea is just 100% focus on the sound. Now, it might be a little bit weird, again, if you're not used to focusing on the sound. So something that can be helpful is to have sort of a few things to think about. These are the 3 things that I think about is how did the note start? How is the note sustaining? And I'll do any adjustments or experimenting to get the best sustain that I can to it. And then plan a smooth transition to the next note. And part of that smooth transition then is a good start to the next note. And then you sort of do that on each note. And I think the most important part is to not be settling for anything as you're going through these. If it's a little bit airy, don't be like, I don't like how airy it is, or that start wasn't quite clean. If there's something that you didn't like, fix it. Stop, try it again, and get it. This is where you're learning how to play the clarinet, because if you can't sound amazing and exactly the way that you want on something as simple as this, then you're going to have a real hard time sounding good on something as complicated as like the barrio sequences that we were looking at, or even music that's slightly more complicated than this. So it is really important to find the sweet spot, Don't settle for anything and really get it. So I'm going to play this first line and I'm going to demonstrate how I do long tones and talk sort of out loud what I would be thinking and what I'm adjusting here. I was actually surprised. That start was pretty good. I wasn't expecting it to be that good, but that was good. Even though it came out good, because I wasn't sure or wasn't confident, I'm going to do it again so I feel in control of making it come out good. The C had a pretty good sound to it, maybe a little tense, but then the D was really stuffy and dull compared to that. So I'm going to practice the transition from C to D and try to get them to match. Bad start. Also a bad start. I feel like I was kind of settling for the D there. I'm actually just going to re-wet my reed because it's still not feeling great. And this is exactly what I mean. Have your ears really attuned to this kind of stuff. Really get picky with it. You'd think a professional player like myself doing something as simple as this seems really silly, but I promise you it's not. These are the things that make the most difference. And I find on days when I really get the warm-ups dialed in, everything feels better. I can play my music better. My reeds all feel better. It's really worthwhile. So I'm going to do it again. There's a little bit of a wah, not a great transition from D to E. The F kind of popped out. There's something a little buzzy and rattly in the E that I don't like. I'm happy with everything, but when it comes to breathing, I'll usually breathe in the middle of the note, so I practice the transitions between every note. Kind of a mushy transition. C kind of popped out. And I'm happy with how that ended. So that's how in depth I go with these things when I'm doing them on my own. And that's how you should do them too. And it might have been boring to listen to for sure, but playing that was not boring at all to me. Even though I was playing literally just 5 notes up and down with no rhythm or no like musicality to them, just taking that time to think, is this the sound that I want? How does my embouchure feel? All of that stuff we learned in part 1. Are my fingers moving well? There's no articulation here, so maybe not that. But I was thinking about my tongue position and finding the sweet spot to everything. And that's what it's all about. And you'll notice there's this little play button here. This, again, is a screenshot from the actual Next Generation Clarinet Method program. With these little play buttons, that means you can click on it and see a video, and the video is going to be very similar to what I just did. So it's not just a video of me like playing it perfectly to like give you an idea of what you should be aiming for. It's a video of me explaining how to practice it and actually going through practicing, talking out loud of what I'm hearing and how I'm thinking about it. And the idea is you watch that and it sort of helps you find what you should be doing. So you can actually pause here if you want and do the long tones, or you can watch through. Spoiler alert, the putting it into practice is going to be doing these exercises at the end of this section. So you can pause and do only like 2 to 5 minutes, about how long I just did on it, with the same kind of thought process going through it. Or you can wait till the end and then do all the warm-ups together. Either way is totally fine, as long as at some point you do the work and give it a try and try to have that mindset of really getting the fundamentals on these things. So next up we have technique. A technique exercise is about that good finger motion, but also still kind of with the long tone sound. I really like to think about the technique as kind of the bridge from long tones to more complicated music. It's adding one more layer. In long tones, it's like only sound quality, that's all we have to think about. Yeah, there's a little bit of finger motion things to get the transitions good, but since there's no rhythm or time pressure for those transitions, there's no stress of like, oh, I gotta move my fingers now. So it's the simplest form of just playing a note and sounding great on it. Then we add one more layer of complexity now, which is moving our fingers while we're doing it. So we want to keep that sound going, but more of the focus is on the finger motion here because it's a technique exercise and we're tackling that second component of clarinet playing, which is the fingers. Remember that stuff we learned in part 1, relaxed fingers, minimal motion, precise coordination, independent motion, all of that good stuff. Like I mentioned, the rhythm is really important here. We need to have steady, confident rhythm. If you do this exercise and just sort of move the fingers whenever they feel like it, then you're not building good, confident finger coordination. What we need in music at the end of the day is for the fingers to move to the right fingering when the music wants it, when the rhythm wants it. So in the technique, we need to be moving with really great rhythm when the rhythm wants. Use a metronome so that you can really get that coordinated and really be precise and having to move when the metronome says to move, when the music says to move, rather than when your fingers feel like it. And then for now, slur everything. This again, screenshot from the book. This one does also have a video of me going through it. This is actually the middle of 3 lines for this exercise in the book. And there's an option in the book to do a articulation version of it where you can do like slur to, tongue to, things like that, and sort of get a hybrid of a technique and articulation exercise. But I'm going to pull up my metronome, and it doesn't have to be fast. It just needs to be precise. So I'm going to go at 60 beats per minute. Hopefully this balances okay sound-wise. And I'm going to, again, show you how I would do this and talk out loud through it. One other thing on this particular exercise that I explain in much more detail in the book is the repeats are many, many, many repeats. As many repeats as you want to get everything dialed in. Good sound, relaxed, minimal, precise, independent finger motion, perfectly in time with the metronome, all of that good stuff. So I'm going to do this and sort of talk out loud or talk through my thought process. It was kind of a rough start. I didn't feel like I was totally dialed in with the metronome right away. So I'm going to start again. I was just doing it. It was feeling good, but I noticed that I had some tension in my left hand, so I was sort of relaxing that wrist down, keeping the nice natural hand position. That was feeling pretty good. I did notice the reason why I was getting tension in my wrist and my pinky was because it wasn't independent motion. I was getting a little bit too much pinky action involved with my ring finger moving, so I needed to independent that a little bit more, which is surprisingly difficult to just sort of hold your hand flat and just wiggle the ring finger without moving the other fingers. So that's what that needed, and that fixed it. I felt pretty good about that measure, so I'm going to go on to the next. That felt pretty good. I was liking the sound as well. I was noticing, I think I'm kind of trying to get the clarinet up to be in view of the camera, and that's also where some of this left wrist tension is, so I kept relaxing into that. Keep thinking about keeping my thumb in position and anchoring the clarinet into my teeth. Very consistent motion with those things, and I was feeling good. And I won't do the last measure because, again, I bet this is really boring to listen to, but it's not boring at all to play again because I have all of that stuff that's going on in my mind. And that stuff that I'm thinking about, first of all, it's preventing these from being boring, so that's a good benefit to it. But it's also that stuff that's actually making my clarinet playing better so that I can do the more complicated music and feel confident and in control because I have that really simple, good control over my fingers. So really find those things, go deeper with it, get picky about it, use that stuff that we learned in part 1 about the quality of playing, and bring that to the warm-ups and the fundamentals exercise and build up those clarinet fundamentals as you work on this super simple music. And again, you can pause here, give this exercise a try for 3 or 5 minutes or so, or you can go on and we'll do it at the end. But that's technique. The last part of the 3-step warm-up is articulation. So this is a scale articulation exercise. And again, it's all about that long tone sound, but now we're moving the tongue. You'll also notice that we're moving our fingers here too, because we're moving up through the scale. So we're adding another layer. We have long tone sound, technique, finger motion. Now we're adding in the tongue motion to be thinking about as well on top of those things. So we need that long tone sound still, but now we're moving our tongue. Another thing, focus on that minimal tongue motion. Like we were talking about when we learned how to articulate in part 1, we need that minimal, precise, nice tongue motion. Like I talked about in the articulation, keep it feeling like a long tone. That's why it starts with a long half note, is so we can get the sound dialed in, feel what it feels like to have the sound moving, and then just move a little bit of the tongue to not disrupt that long tone feel. We still want to use a metronome because we don't want our tongue moving whenever it feels like. We want it to be moving in time with the music, with the metronome. And then the goals are to have consistent articulation, so every note sounds the same, and have the sound be really smooth. So what I mean by that is oftentimes students, when they're doing this articulation, they'll have sort of inconsistent shapes to the notes. Have sort of weird things like that. You also notice the sound. This is a really common one to listen out for. Listen to what happens to my sound going from the half note to the tongue notes. That was a bad start. So you probably really obviously heard that it got softer, but it also got kind of thinner, more squished, less free and resonant. And that's because my whole tongue position changed. So I had like one good tongue position on the long note. And then as I started thinking about tonguing, I sort of dropped my tongue and got it too close to the reed. And that changed those things in my mouth. By tonguing or even just thinking about tonguing, it disrupted the middle, front, middle, back, throat, soft palate, all of that stuff changed when I started tonguing. So again, we need to keep the long tone feel, go for consistency of sound and articulation. So let me work through this one, demonstrating how I would do this. Again, at nice, comfortable 60 beats per minute on the metronome. I felt like at the start, I was sort of finding my zone, finding my groove. I think around the F, it was feeling good. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and see if I can get it good right from the start. The E and D are still a little fuzzy. I want to get those sorted out. I'm going to go back to the F to have like a bass line and then keep that sound quality through the E and D. And then again, we have the long tone at the end to sort of check in with that, see how it was staying consistent through all of the articulated notes. I didn't talk quite as much through everything that I was hearing, but you might have heard that last time that I was doing it, and you can rewind and listen for this. On the D, it started a little bit too thin, and then I was able to adjust and open it up. So again, none of that was boring at all, even though this is super simple. I don't have to think about these notes at all because they're really comfortable and familiar. But because I was really focused on hearing the sound, thinking about how my tongue was moving, trying to feel where is my tongue in my mouth, how does it actually feel, you'd be amazed at how little awareness we have of what our tongue is doing, because so much of talking and eating and pretty much everything we do in our lives, the tongue is just sort of moving where it needs to be, doing its own thing. So finding conscious control over it is really a new skill that you have to develop. I'll also say one more thing. If you're not comfortable crossing the break yet, then you can simplify this exercise and just go to G and then skip down to F so that you skip these middle three measures where you cross the break. And that's totally fine. This isn't about trying to do something crazy. Remember, we need the music to feel simple and easy. So if you're stressed about crossing the break, then you're not going to have 100% of your bandwidth focused on good, consistent articulation and sound. So however you need to simplify the exercise to make it really easy to do, that's what matters. Simple music, 100% of bandwidth going towards, in this case, articulation or finger motion on the technique or sound quality on the long tones. Those are the fundamentals that we need to develop, not doing some crazy, complicated warm-up or crazy routine that sometimes sounds like showing off when some people do it. And as you're more advanced and that music feels easier, then you can definitely add complexity to your warm-ups and go after a little bit more complicated music, but still with a focus on fundamentals. But that's the important part. Focus on fundamentals. Don't stress. Which brings us to warm-up myth. This one is a really good one. People will think, once I'm good enough, I don't need to do warm-ups anymore. Warm-ups and fundamentals are just like the thing that you do when you're a beginner. Yeah, sure, beginners should do long tones to get the sound consistent and things like that, but it's 100% not the case. In fact, it might be even the opposite, that more advanced players and professionals maybe even spend more time doing warm-ups. In a masterclass that I played in for Romain Guillaume, who's a really great soloist, principal clarinetist of the Paris Opera, I believe, very, very, very good player, one of the great living professionals of our time. He said that he doesn't really practice the music anymore. He knows the repertoire. He's played Debussy Premier Rhapsody, Mozart Clarinet Concerto, like those big standard pieces. He's played them so many times, he doesn't have to practice them anymore because he knows how it goes. What he does practice is working on reeds every day. And with the reeds, he's doing scales and long tones and warm-up exercises to feel what it feels like to play the reed on the simple music, and just make sure that he has good reeds ready to go for the performance. So no matter what level you're at, warm-ups and fundamentals are still key, still super important to be doing. So putting it into practice now, this is really simple. Do the 3-step warm-up. And I would suggest doing it every single time that you practice from here on the rest of your clarinet playing career until you're an international soloist or doing whatever you want to be doing and whatever your clarinet dreams are. 3-step warm-up every time to get good sound quality in the long tones, good finger motion in the technique, and good articulation in the articulation. And for these particular exercises, try these. Do these ones. These ones might feel super duper simple to you, but again, that's the whole point, so that you can really focus on the quality. I challenge you, you're looking at these exercises that we just did and you're like, oh, those are like so like simple and gonna be boring. I challenge you to try so hard on those exercises that they aren't boring. They're about as simple as it gets. I wanted to make this training and the test drive accessible to any level of player, even if you're just very first beginning and only know 5 notes. So try it. Try the simplest exercise with the most sophisticated and deep attention to quality that you can, and see what results you'll get. That's where the results are. When you can level up the simple stuff, then you're building the fundamentals that will carry over to the advanced stuff. So do these until you can do them consistently great with a really high attention to detail. Even if you have another warm-up routine, just for a few days, give these ones a try. And you don't have to go crazy with it. Here's my suggested timing for each of these. So just like 3-ish minutes on each of them. There's a range. I generally spend a little bit more time on the technique than the other two, just because I feel like technique is a really great foundation where I'm really focused on good sound still, but I'm also really wiggling the fingers around, and there's 10, or I guess 9, because you never wiggle your right thumb, but there's 9 fingers to be wiggling, whereas the sound is just the sound, the tongue motion's just the tongue motion. But you can adjust the timing to whatever feels comfortable for you, as long as you're doing the work, finding the good sound, finding the good finger motion, and finding the good tongue motion. And again, don't be afraid to keep doing sort of what we were doing in part 1, where you're really experimenting with it. I do that a lot on my long tones, especially, where I'm really doing some different things, trying to get the sound dialed in, and then I sort of build in that consistency of sound as I go through the technique and articulation. But go for it. Really go deep with the quality and attention to detail, and I'll see you tomorrow. If you're pausing here and taking that time, if you're binging through it, still pause here, take the, maximum 11 minutes to do those warm-up exercises and try putting them into practice, and then I'll see you in part 3. All right, here we are for part 3. Whether you're watching this day by day or not, I hope you had a great time doing those warm-up exercises, and I hope that you found that shift in perspective. Again, they are super simple exercises, but really taking them seriously and really going for the fundamentals of clarinet playing took me from being a pretty good clarinetist in high school to being the best high school clarinetist in the state in one academic year. So these really are the most important things for playing the instrument and for improving and enjoying it more. And you'll find when you're able to really have control over the sound, even on those simple long tones, or have control over those fingers on those simple finger flexibility exercises, it's going to start applying to the music and start showing up in things that used to be hard and you felt like you weren't sure how the sound was going to come out, or you didn't feel like you could wiggle your fingers fast enough. You're going to now have the fundamentals to be able to achieve that. And that's what part 3 is all about, is now applying things to music. So we've talked a lot about clarinet. Part 1 was learning what the components of clarinet playing are and how they work. Part 2 was mastering that through the power of fundamentals and warm-ups. Now we're looking at the components of the music itself. Again, like everything throughout this, I really like to simplify to maximize the learning potential, because when it's something that's simple to go after, it's so much more achievable rather than something complex. Looking again at that barrio sequenza back in part 1, where I was saying that even the most complicated music has the same components of clarinet playing, same thing for the music. Same components of music, from hot cross buns, Mary Had a Little Lamb, all the way to the most complicated stuff. And those components are rhythm, notes, and style. You already know rhythm and notes probably. I will say, if you don't count rhythm and you aren't good at playing with the metronome or playing with the steady beat, you really should work on that and practice that. I do have a course called True Rhythm Mastery that's all about that and helping people really connect the rhythm to the beat and be able to count and really be confident going with the metronome, with a conductor, with other people. So that might be helpful, but you probably already do some kind of counting. You're pretty good at figuring out at least simple rhythms. You know the notes because we just worked on them in the warm-ups and scales. That's a side benefit of scales, is it's not just teaching you how to wiggle your fingers well, but it's also teaching you to read the notes and where the notes are. So that's fantastic. Now, style is basically everything else. It's a little bit of a catch-all, but I think it's really appropriate, because I don't think something like articulation is significant enough to compare to rhythm or notes. I don't think dynamics are significant enough to compare to rhythm or notes. I think they all kind of group together into style, and style absolutely does have as much impact as the rhythm and the notes. You can play the right notes and right rhythms in a really boring way, or at the wrong tempo, or the wrong articulations, wrong dynamics, and it sounds like a completely different piece of music. So the way all of those things to come together, and the main components of it are tempo, articulation, and dynamics, the way those come together and work with the rhythm and the notes really creates the actual music. Now I have a practice myth for you. The myth is that repetition is the key to learning and growth. This one's also, like the other ones, kind of a half myth. It's a little bit true. Repetition is really important. Repetition is great for building consistency, which makes sense. If you want to be able to do something the same way every time and have it be consistent, a great way to practice that is repeat it the same way every time. But that second part about growth, and I think learning something new too, that's where you can see that repetition is not the key to growth and learning. Because if you're doing the same thing the same way every time, you're going to get the same results every time. And this is not growth. This is a static line. Growth comes from doing things differently, making deliberate changes, deliberate improvements, and deliberate practice. I have this practice framework, which is one of my favorite things. I have a YouTube video on this. That YouTube video is also in the full program. But this is my sort of practice framework. And it starts with this premise of sort of the success formula. And the success formula basically goes, get clarity on what you want, get honesty about where you're at, and then how to go from where you are to where you want to be becomes pretty obvious if you're really clear. And this is exactly what this is we start with our goal. We need to learn the music. We need to visualize it, or audiate it is a fancier music term for hearing the music in your head. Listening to recordings is also a great way to sort of set the goal, set the intention, because you hear how you want the music to go, you know what you want out of the music. And remember, I said clarity is what we're getting here. So this is where it's really important to really find that clarity on how the music goes, and the clearer you can be, the better. So it's one thing to say, for example, the Mozart Clarinet Concerto. You can have it learned and have the audiation of beam bum ba da bum bum ba dee dum ba dum. Like, yeah, I kind of sort of know how it goes. But if you can get really clear about exactly the tempo you want, exactly the shaping, exactly the articulation, dee bum 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 bum. That's too slow. Dee dum bum 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 bum. Dee bottom. That's a much clearer image, a much more accurate goal for what I want. So it's going to be easier to really get that because I know what I really want to get. It's not just sort of an ambiguous, like, oh yeah, that's kind of how the recording goes. It's like really specific as much as possible. Then on the other hand, the you are here, this is your honesty part. The very best thing for this is recording yourself. Sometimes, actually all the time when we're playing, we're putting energy into playing and putting thought into playing. We have the resonance in our head that's happening. And it's hard to really listen objectively while also playing. That's the power of recording. Record yourself, play it back, and you'll hear it like the audience is hearing it. Also, if you're using a recording for your goal, then it's a much more direct comparison. You're hearing the recording of how you want it to go, you hear the recording of how you're doing it, and then the gap starts to become clear. Now, in the gap, I have a couple frameworks that are really helpful for sort of finding those next steps and what to do. So starting with the what is this idea that I like called the 4 opportunities for improvement. Those 4 opportunities for improvement are rhythm, sound quality, notes, and style. You'll notice that these are pretty similar to the how to play music triangle that we were just looking at, the components of music. We have rhythm, notes, and style. We've added in sound quality there because that's also really important. Sound quality isn't necessarily a component of the music. Sure, maybe some music should have a certain kind of sound to it and other music maybe a little bit different kind of sound to it, but I might group that under style. If it's jazzy, it has a jazzy sound, that's a style thing. The sound quality I'm talking about here is actually the quality of playing that you're getting out of the instrument. So for the 4 opportunities for improvement, there's clarinet playing components integrated at every step of it. So thinking about rhythm, rhythm is absolutely, do you know how to count the rhythm? Are you playing the rhythm accurately with a steady beat? But also, are you getting your fingers to the right place at the right time? So that's the clarinet component of rhythm that happens. There's also with notes. Yes, you have to be reading the notes and know where you're going with the notes, but again, are your fingers relaxed and natural getting there? Style, there's the music component of style of it's staccato and should have this light bouncy articulation, but then there's the clarinet side of it of can you actually do light bouncy articulation on the clarinet? So there's all kinds of overlapping things there. But the way that I use the 4 opportunities for improvement is I have that clear goal of what I want. I listen to my recording and then I ask myself, okay, how can I improve the rhythm? Was there anything about the rhythm that needed to be improved? Was it exactly right in time? Were the rhythms placed where they should be? Was I grouping the rhythms the way that I should be, where I'm leading to the right notes and leading to the beats that are important in the time signature? Sound quality. Is this exactly how I want to sound? Is everything as smooth and connected as I wanted? Do I have good starts to notes the way that I want? Are the notes ending the way that I want? Notes. Obviously, am I playing the right notes? That's why notes is kind of lower down in the hierarchy because everybody pays attention to if they're playing the right notes or not. That's like the first thing that we all think about, but I don't know if it's always the most important. And the other thing about that too, when it comes to the notes, is not just are you playing the right notes, but did you feel confident playing the right notes? Did you feel like your fingers were natural, relaxed, in control, minimal motion, all that good finger stuff that we talked about as you were getting the notes? And then last up is the style. So the style is all of that other stuff that makes the music really come to life. Dynamics, tempo. Is it the right tempo? Am I doing it with the metronome at the right tempo? Is the dynamics, are they coming across? Is there enough contrast in the dynamics? Is there too much contrast in the dynamics? Am I leaving room to do whatever dynamic changes I need to? Is the staccato, is it short enough for this style? Does it need to have more bounce? Does it need to have a clearer start? All of those things. I'm asking those questions. And this is just a great little framework to get you going on what can be improved, because so often we get stuck where we play something and we think, yeah, that was kind of right. I think I don't know if maybe there was something that could be better, but we sort of get stuck there. And that's where recording yourself will make things more obvious, and you can go back and check and see how things were going. Also, the 4 opportunities for improvement, asking those questions will really help you get what needs to be improved and find those opportunities for improvement. A real quick tangent on recording. I personally love the Modacity app. Modacity is a great way to just pull up the app, record yourself, and it immediately plays it back after you're done recording. And right in the app, you just one button press to slow down the recording, which is an invaluable tool for finding those opportunities for improvement. So now that you have an opportunity identified, then we move on to how to actually improve that. And that's in the 3 I's of practice. The first I is to identify. So that's kind of where you're asking those questions and you found maybe something like, these particular notes don't sound clear and clean. Maybe it's a 16th note run. It feels like you can't quite hear every note. Something's getting mushy there. So you've identified what the problem is. The next step, the next I, is to isolate and improve it. I know that's 2 I's. I don't know. I can't count. You'll see that on the 3 C's also. But we need to isolate and improve it. So take that little run. Play however many notes you've identified are the problem area. Simplify it also. This is one of my best tips for improving, is simplify. Do it slower, do smaller chunks, do whatever you need to like really get it correct and really know that you're actually playing the right notes and playing them smoothly. As you're isolating and simplifying, you'll start to notice things of like, oh, I'm having a problem playing this note because my pinky's not in the right position ahead of time, or I'm having tension because this is a fingering that I don't normally use, so I need to build more familiarity with that fingering. This is not coming out because I'm not keeping my air supported as I'm crossing the break. You'll find those things and find those more root issues for why it's not going well, and then you're sort of improving those little things, and you improve that little section. Then the final I is to integrate it back together and put it in context. So often we'll isolate and improve something, and when we're doing just that little chunk, it's not a problem, but then in context, something else goes awry. So you might find when you're integrating that, yes, there was the problem there, but it was actually because your hand was getting out of position on the notes leading into it, or something like that. That's just one example, but that's the overview of practicing and how to be deliberate with your practice. Get really clear on how you want it to go, record yourself and get really honest about what's actually coming out of the instrument. Ask yourself those questions of the 4 opportunities for improvement to identify what needs to be worked on. Once you've identified, that's the first step of the 3 I's of practice. Then you can isolate and improve and integrate it, and then you'll be in good shape. And then the last thing when it comes to practicing is to remember the goal of practicing. The 3 C's, or like 5 C's, depending on how you count it, but the 3 C's of practice are the goal of practice. First, we need to get it correct. The objectively correct stuff. Right notes, right rhythms, playing it musically how we want it to go. Correct. Then, once it's correct, we also need to make sure that it's consistent. Because if it's correct once out of 100 times, then that means you have a 99% chance of playing it wrong in the performance. And in the performance, you only have one chance to get it right. So we want to be more in that like 90+% consistent. And the key to consistency is comfort, confidence, in control, those kinds of things. When you're at least 80% comfortable and confident that you got the part down, then you're going to be at least 80% consistent. So the more comfortable it feels, the more confident you are that you're really nailing it and you're really in control of making it happen, the more likely you're going to be consistent with it and consistently correct with it. It's totally possible to be confident and consistent, but incorrect. So you want to make sure that you have that clarity on what correct is. Make sure you really know how the rhythms go. Make sure that you aren't learning in the wrong rhythms. Bonus brain neuroscience tip. The way our brains work is we just get better at doing whatever we're doing. So every time you make a mistake, that mistake becomes wired in and more natural and easy to do and more easy to repeat and more consistent. We don't want a consistent, confident incorrectness. We want it to be correct first and then build the consistency and confidence with it. So that's how to practice. Now we can actually apply that to music. And again, this practice framework is in the full Next Generation Clarinet method. This is another screenshot page from the method, and these are some of the short music studies. So there's short studies for all 4 opportunities for improvement, and they're sort of progressive studies where they start out very simple. There's rhythms, sound quality, notes, and style, and you just go through sort of one at a time and really nail these things. They're specifically or intentionally really short, and the point of that is so that you can have less quantity to worry about and really maximize the quality. You probably know from part 2 with the warm-ups and fundamentals, like that's my whole thing, is simplifying to maximize the quality of things. The warm-ups, super simple exercises, full focus on quality of clarinet playing. The short music studies, super short bits so that you can really get it correct. It's the longer you do it, the more you do, the easier it is to miss something, even just slightly misread something, or just not have the time to really dig into it and figure it out. The short music studies really dial the things in. So take your time and use that framework. So I'm going to go through this first one and sort of talk you through it. And then you can do the second one as you're sort of practicing and putting it into practice for this section. So looking at number 1, the stepwise motion, I'm looking through here, and the first thing that I need to do is get clarity on how this music goes, get clarity on the goal. And if you have the whole program, you can click that play button and you can hear me play it and hear me work through it to help get clarity on it. You can also sort of test yourself and figure out what it is and how the music goes, just sort of through your own sight reading and super scary ear training. You don't have to be perfect with the ear training part of it, but this audiation and clarifying the music is definitely a component of ear training that will help. So I'm looking through it, and I'm kind of thinking in the 4 opportunities for improvement first, and the components of music, right? Rhythm, sound quality, notes, style. So looking at the rhythm first, so we see some 16th notes, quite a few 16th notes actually. No syncopations though, so I think it's not going to be too crazy with the rhythm. I might actually count through some of this to like get a feel, 1 E and a 2 and 1 E and a 2, and sort of thinking about, okay, where I'm going with the rhythm. I think I feel comfortable with the rhythm. Sound quality is not something that you totally have to think about when you're audiating. You should audiate hopefully with good sound quality and an ideal sound quality. That's more when we're playing, we'll really want to pay attention to how it's actually sounding. Notes, so I'm looking for any patterns in the notes as I'm getting clarity on how this goes, and sort of sight singing through it. So we have stepwise motion. The title gives us some information on where the notes are going, and I can see that doo-dee doo-dee da-dum, doo-dee doo-dee da-dum, bum 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 bum, then that's just a scale, so that's a recognizable pattern. And we have a lot of this neighbor tone. Da-ba-ba-ba-bum, do-dee-do-dee-do. And then neighbor tones again. Dee-da-dee-da, dee-da-dee-da, dee-da-dee-da. I might recognize that as kind of a sequence where we have a pattern da-da-da-da, and then go down a step, da-da-da-da, then down a step, da-da-da-da, and then a scale, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-dee-da-dee-da. And then we kind of finish the sequence. It's slightly interrupted by the scale. And again, you don't need to like identify sequences or neighbor tones or any of that music theory stuff, but finding those kinds of patterns. I just have a name for those patterns from the nerdy music theory stuff, but all you have to do is recognize da 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 da. Okay, that's a pattern. That's easy to see. Then I'm thinking about the style as well in this, especially for these are the short style studies, so the style becomes really important. There's a lot of dynamic action happening in these first three measures, but looking more closely at it, it's pretty straightforward. Doody doody yadum, booty doody yadum. That's like a pretty intuitive dynamic pattern. Bonus tip for dynamics, I always recommend really integrating it into the music. It's really hard to like read the notes and rhythms and then also be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing this dynamic stuff at the bottom of the page and then trying to make that happen. Doing it with the music and putting the dynamics as an expression to the music is so much more helpful. So I'm not da da da, okay, I'm supposed to be getting louder, loud, soft. It's how the music goes. The music naturally wants to doody doody yadum, doody doody yadum. Like that's an intuitive sort of flow of the music and phrasing. And I think the more you can always have kind of a flow to the phrasing and have a dynamic intention, the easier it'll be to actually do the written dynamics, because then all you have to do is look at the written dynamics and put that onto the intention of the music. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a little bit more of an advanced musicality thing, but always have an intention for the direction of the music. Usually it'll be really intuitive as you get higher, get louder, get lower, get softer. That's a great general rule to follow. And then see if there's any written dynamics that reinforce your intuitive ideas, or maybe you're contrasting to your intuitive ideas. One in here that's very intuitive is the last three measures. We have that sequence I talked about where we're going down, and we're also getting softer as we go down. Dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dum bum 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 dee da dee da dee. So I think that makes good intuitive sense. I don't have to worry about reading a diminuendo there now because I've integrated it into the music. So that's my little bonus dynamic tip. And working through the style. Last style thing, articulation and tempo. There's no tempo marked, so that means I can go whatever tempo I want, but I need to find a tempo that fits with the style that I'm going for. So if I want something kind of bouncy, dooey dooey yadum, booey dooey yadum, ba 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 bum, I can experiment with that. If I want something a little more lyrical, maybe slower, dooey dooey yadum, dooey dooey yadum, pom 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 pom. I think both of those work fine. I think I'm a little bit more inclined to go with the faster, bouncier version. That sounded a little bit more correct to me, but I think both of them worked. I think part of the reason why I liked the little bouncier version is because of the staccato. I think that articulation is kind of the clue that's going to set our tempo, where dum bum 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 is a little awkward, but bum 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 bum, that feels really good. And that's, I think, the kind of articulation I want. So you can see how it's all kind of interconnected. It's not something that you can just like figure out one thing at a time, but those are the components, and those are the components that come together and get all integrated. So it's up to us to sort of find those things. So now I have clarity on what I want. Now I could play it and record myself too. Record myself playing it. I won't do the recording because it's a little awkward to play that back on here, but I do highly encourage you to be recording yourself and working through that. But that's the next step now. I am clear on how I want it to go, clear on how it should go in my head. Now I'm going to play it on the instrument. and ask, what are those opportunities for improvement? What could I make better? I realized playing it through, there was one spot where I didn't quite get full clarity on how I wanted it to go, and that's in the fourth measure. The fourth measure doesn't have a dynamic marked, so that would imply that it's continuing to be forte with the forte right before it. But then we go from forte to fortissimo, and I didn't really play it that way, and I don't know if that necessarily feels good. So I'm going to try doing it exactly as written and see what I think. And I'm just going to start on measure 3, just because I'm isolating and figuring out this one little section. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really love that staying forte, because it feels weird to over sustain that G, because the previous 2 measures we've been diminuendoing at the second half of the measure. It also feels weird to play the C, D, C, D, C really loud, because the first 2 measures start with that and they're soft. The last measure is the same as the fourth measure and it's also soft, so it kind of sticks out. Maybe it would be good for contrast, but I think the nail in the coffin for why this shouldn't be sustaining forte is because it's really awkward to get up to fortissimo from there. I think I want that fortissimo to sound a little bit more of a surprise, or it's also easier to get the contrast and make it sound like a fortissimo if I'm coming from a softer dynamic. So I'm going to try doing the fourth measure mezzo piano like the last measure and see if I like that. Personally, I like that a lot better. And you could disagree, and because it's not printed in the music, the composer, which in this case is myself, hasn't given us any information on what it should be, so it's up to our interpretation. You do have this video of the composer now saying that I prefer it being softer, so you could take that as evidence that the composer wants it softer, but I leave it up to you to figure out what you want there. So that's one thing that I needed more clarity on. Now I can find other opportunities for improvement too. I was pretty happy with how I played it. I think the sound quality was a little bit dull though. I'm going to try it again and see if I can embody this character of more bouncy, more like stepwise motion. We have the motion stepwise, like we're sort of stepping along, maybe almost like skipping along. Well, I guess it's not skipping motion, but step, but kind of like more lively walking, stepping along. And recording that back, especially if I slowed down the recording, I'd probably notice that in the beginning of the fifth measure, I sort of stretched that note rhythmically. I did a little where I held on to that note just a little bit. But I think I actually like that. And I think that was kind of a nice effect where we really emphasize that downbeat. We really emphasize the fortissimo. And I think it works out okay because the rhythm is still predictable. Dee-ba, 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 dee-ba. I sort of make up for it and I still get to beat 2 really well on time. So I think it could be a rhythm opportunity for improvement, or it could be a nice stylistic thing to be doing. And again, this is pretty simple and straightforward. Like I said, these style studies or all the short music studies are progressive. So they start really simple and straightforward and then get quite complicated. So it's okay to get through these first ones a little bit faster as long as you're going in depth. You can tell that I really took time to really figure out how the music goes. I really got picky with the clarinet playing, found those things that I need more clarity on. My staccato sounded good, but that might be something that would be worth like really exploring. Like really getting a consistent, clear, light, bouncy staccato. And again, the more you've mastered those kinds of things on the simple warm-up stuff, the easier it's going to be to put into practice here on the music. So for the test drive, you can absolutely go after number 2 on your own. I will give you a little hint or tip for this one. Notice the title, fanfare. Think about what a fanfare is. there's not much interesting articulation marked. It's a lot of just nothing marked. So that means not just a bland nothing articulation. That means it's up to you to find an appropriate articulation. So think about what a fanfare is and think about what that might imply for the articulation. I also mentioned that these first ones are pretty simple and you can get through them pretty quick, especially if you're a more advanced player. But I want to show you real quick that they do get quite advanced and show you some of the other short music studies. So looking at the short style studies, these are the last ones. These are the last things in the book before we get to the additional resources at the end. And they get really complicated. This number 12 one, when I was recording the video and working through it and demonstrating how I play it and how it goes, it took a bit of work and a bit of practice to get this ironed out for me because there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening in that one. Same thing with this one, it's in 5/8. It's really all kinds of crazy stuff going. I'll show you also the other ones. So short note studies start super duper simple, but they get more complicated. They're grouped by the registers of the instrument too. So we start just natural notes in the low register, and we go all the way up to chromatic notes in the highest register, the altissimo, to get really familiar with them. Sound quality studies also are kind of long tone-esque. They still are really important to be in time, but again are focusing on matching different registers of the clarinet. You can see this down to E1. We have these low notes getting that really rich low sound and then trying to bring that up really smoothly into the upper shallow that sometimes feels a little thin or fuzzy. And for the rhythm studies, we start with just quarters and half notes, eighth notes on the beat, really simple kind of stuff, and then it gets really complicated too. I'll go down. Yeah, here's the end of the rhythm one. So we're getting into those 30-second notes, the 7/8 time signature plus changing time signature beats, all kinds of fun stuff as we get into the more advanced stuff in the whole next generation clarinet method. So that is part 3. Now it's time to put it into practice. I already suggested you could do that number 2 short style study of the fanfare and really find the style on that. Look at those components of the musicality, apply all of those good fundamentals of the clarinet playing that you've worked on. But you can also use this practice framework on any music that you're working on. And I hope by giving you this framework, it gives you something a little bit more tangible when you're practicing, so you can be a little bit more deliberate in your practice and make more quality and more growth rather than just repeating the same mistakes over and over and stagnating. You can make that progress. Also, a great thing to do to put this into practice, this is the test drive of the program. This is where you saw the sort of philosophy of each component to it. But you can actually get the full next generation clarinet method, and that's going to really help you to put this all into practice, because what we did here is the philosophical overview. The next generation clarinet method gives you way more exercises to actually be implementing it and working through it. A good analogy that I kind of think of with this is we just put together the vehicle for you. The things that we went through are the engine, how to actually play clarinet. We taught you how to drive and mastering the fundamentals. You sort of know how to put the vehicle into motion, and then applying it to music. Maybe that's learning the rules of the road. So you're ready to go. The only thing that you're missing is the fuel to make it happen. And that's what the full program is. It just gives you more of these exercises, even more information. Every exercise has a video of me explaining things like this. Probably each slide kind of correlated to a video in the program. There's 24 slides in this presentation. There's 164 videos in the full program. So it's a lot of stuff in there to really guide you through this and really fuel your progress. So if you're interested, go to quickstartclarinet.com/nextgenbook. There's probably a link below this video as well, or a button there for you to click to get the full program and work through it. I want to share one last thing that I think is really neat about the program. So first of all, there's this members area. This is where when you get the program, this is what you log into. Here's where you can actually download the book itself. But there's also these timelines that help guide you through it as well, so that you're not just like doing every exercise, because some of the exercises in the beginning, or like some of those earlier short music studies that are the simpler ones, if you're a more advanced player, they might be kind of boring. If you're a more beginner player, you don't want to just run through those because you're trying to do the end of the rhythm stuff that's super hard before you even did the easy parts of the sound quality or notes. So I put together these timelines to sort of guide you through the book in a logical way. This is what the actual timelines look like. So this is like an intermediate level. Notice part 2 was mastering the fundamentals. This is the mastering the fundamentals timeline. So the beginning is reviewing the learning in the beginning. Then we have our regular daily warm-up, and then you just do like this practice session on this practice session on this practice session on this, and every day you're warming up with the daily warm-up. So the program was really designed and intended to be something that you can go through completely on your own and get all of the benefit of if you were actually taking private lessons. So that was my goal with this, is to put my very best teaching and resources into this one program for you. And last but not least, if you have any questions about anything that we went over in this training, email me at quickstartclarinet@gmail.com. If you have any questions about getting the full program or what's in the full program, you can email me there as well. Whether you get the full program or not, I hope that you got some value out of this training and seeing the process and got to know my philosophy of teaching a little bit. I think the stuff in this training alone, if you really go back, rewatch it, take notes, implement it, I think it will make a big difference in your playing. I also think it's an absolute no-brainer to get the full next generation clarinet method, so you can have the fuel to take the vehicle, to take your clarinet playing wherever you want to take it. Everything is in there. Again, hopefully by seeing this training, you can see we learn how to play the clarinet, we actually master the fundamentals on our simple warm-ups, and then we apply it to the music and start making beautiful music. And that's, I think, all of our goals, is to enjoy the practice process, not be bored in our warm-ups because now we're thinking of them as fundamentals, be able to tackle music by isolating and improving and knowing what to work on, and have satisfying practice where we actually grow rather than just stagnating, repeating the same mistakes. And then you actually have some music to work on and test it out. Then you can take it to your other method books, your etude books, solos that you want to play, band music that you're working on, orchestra music, whatever it is. But when you have the next generation clarinet method and you have the foundation of playing, hopefully your playing will become frustration free and filled with so much more joy. So thanks again so much for watching this. If you made it this far, congratulations. I know that you have the stick with itness, the commitment to take your clarinet playing to that next level. I hope to see you in the next generation clarinet method. Email me with any questions that you have about anything, and I wish you the very best on your clarinet playing journey.